So I think without further ado, I'll hand over to Claire. Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm just going to go straight to sharing the screen with the presentation. If I can find it, there we go. I've got quite a few documents open because I'm going to go to some other documents as we go through the presentation. So welcome everybody. As Sarah said, my name's Claire Evans. I'm from an organisation called 4CT, youth and community charity based in East Manchester, but we've got 5 buildings that we're responsible for across the city. This is an introductory presentation. It's definitely not going to cover everything, but it's hopefully an initial how to kind of get yourself started on the path to reopening. It's very much aimed at smaller, medium-sized organisations, those without a kind of full-time health and safety professional working within them. We originally planned this presentation with Mac for some work we're doing in North Manchester, so it was very much those North Manchester groups, those smaller groups that we had in mind when it was written. What I'm aiming to do really is give you a condensed view of where to go next, because there is so much guidance out there. You could literally spend your days reading gov.uk emails. I think one day last week I received 92 emails of various guidance and updates, which would be more than a full-time job on its own. So hopefully what we've done is we've distilled some of the key information that groups will need when they're considering reopening. So this is the list of the key links that we'll be referring to. So top of the list is what's called Just Issued, which is the 10-page guidance on how to open your multi-purpose community facility safely. The second link is to the HSE guidance around coronavirus. So that's how to go about doing your risk assessments and the key guidance from a health and safety perspective. There is a sector checklist, which I think is really, really useful. It's a bit hidden in some of I think it's DCMS guidance, but if you click on that sector checklist link, it will ask you questions about your business. So you do have to scroll down to the bottom because most VCS activity won't be on the list, and it kind of has an other box, and you can answer the questions there, and it will actually provide you with a list of key things that you need to consider. And that's the most condensed list that I've found in going through these things. So that's a good one. And the next one is the latest guidance on social distancing. So your 2 meters and your 1 meter plus guidance is all in that document. So really nice link next from keepsafe.org.uk, which are a collection of easy read posters. So they're posters that rely on short English phrases and pictures to explain key coronavirus messages. So perhaps really good for centres where perhaps you've got children, young people, people whose first language isn't English, for example. They're a nice set of clear information. The next link is to your COVID secure poster. So once an organisation's gone through the whole planning and risk assessment stage, you need to display this poster, the COVID secure poster. So it's a bit like the health and safety at work type poster where you put the name of the responsible person. This is kind of the COVID version of that. And the last 2 links are for Manchester Community Central itself, and the main page for all the government advice. So if you've got lots of time, you can work your way through that. Okay. Obviously, all of this information is coming out to you because you're getting a copy of these slides. But just to say, a kind of an advisory note, really. We're not experts, 4CT are not experts in public health or in health and safety, but we're competent and kind of trained individuals. The presentation's got to be regarded as general advice, and it's only current as of now because the guidance changes so regularly. But you can use all the links that we've provided to get further information to make your organisation COVID secure. And COVID secure is the generic term for the 5 key things that you have to do as an organisation before you can reopen. So that's your risk assessments, your sharing your information, making sure you've got social distancing, making sure that your hand hygiene processes are in place, and that your cleaning and disinfecting is appropriate. Obviously, we're focusing on health and safety really in this presentation, but organisations will have to consider other things, their employment policies. I know lots of people are challenged about bringing people back from furlough or bringing people back part-time, all those sorts of things. You'll probably need to look at your volunteer policies as well, and you may well need to check your insurance, and I'm sure you'll all be soon thinking about business planning for the longer term going forward. Mac have got details around a Cranfield Trust webinar that was done that covers all of that in much more detail. It's a really good resource that we can point people to. But for today, we're focusing on buildings, particularly community buildings. Just to note that places of worship have separate guidance, because obviously lots of BCS services operate from places of worship. We're going to think about building responsibilities if it's your own premises. We're going to think a little bit about services in your own building, services in somebody else's building, and a little bit around outdoor and outreach. If none of those things really apply to you, then do use this link and the business reopening questionnaire, and you'll get more specific guidance for yourself. Definitely read the guidance that relates to your circumstances. So if you are a youth organisation, you need to be looking at the NYA, the National Youth Association guidance. All the kind of association bodies have some guidance on usually on their websites. When we've whizzed through the presentation, Sarah said we're going to do the top 10 questions we've heard so far. But we're hoping to provide you with a framework that will help you to recover slowly and safely, give you some tools, links and documents that you can use just to save you the time of going around and trying to source them yourselves. Maybe think about some options of doing things differently, and all of that to give confidence to your organisation and your stakeholders. So I don't know if people can read this. This was one of the many memes that's been on Facebook over the last 12 weeks, but this is one that really struck me about flattening the curve and people rushing out of their doors again. So you are ultimately responsible for the decisions you make around reopening. The government has told us that we can reopen community facilities from Saturday, but if what you do is just too risky, then don't do it. Risk is always a matter of judgment, and you will have to take all your circumstances into account. The key messages in terms of reopening haven't really changed, and the guidance that we had yesterday hasn't really changed them. There are some details around group sizes, and those group sizes that we're allowed to work with, I've written may fluctuate on the presentation. I think there's absolutely no doubt that they will fluctuate over time. But the key things you're going to have to look at is your space, indoors and outdoors. You're going to have to be really careful around numbers and pathways, travel within your premises, but you might have to think about as well the travel to and from your premises, particularly for staff or volunteers. The key messages are the same: social distancing, stay 2 meters apart, got to wash your hands, and your cleaning regimes got to be increased. In terms of being a COVID secure organisation, the links there with the update from health and safety. So far as I am aware, all of these links automatically update as the guidance is reissued. So you shouldn't need to look for new links. These should stay relevant. So I've already mentioned the poster, but the link's there again for the PDF of the poster that you'll need to display after your risk assessment process. Right, so getting down to it, that was all kind of the background, I suppose. We as an organisation, as I say, we've got 5 centres, we run play and youth services, we have services for older people, we hire out our rooms, whole range of stuff like many community organisations will be doing. So we started by breaking down what were the key things that we did and how did we want to go about reopening. And we drew a pretty diagram to show what we wanted to do. So this was our aim as an organisation, where we thought we would be if guidance allowed. So this was our first plan, and we shared this with our staff team as part of our consultation process before we started to then refine that plan further. So I think that's the starting point for any organisation. You've got to look at what you do, bear in mind your own kind of circumstances, and think about what it is that you want to prioritise doing. Obviously, you can write your plan in any format. It doesn't need to have lines and rainbows and things in any format, but I would suggest good governance that you write it down, that you share it with your trustees, that you share it with your staff or your volunteer workforces, and get people's input throughout there. This whole process is probably not one that anybody should tackle on their own, apart from the fact that you'll have sleepless nights. Key in all of this, and it's one of the 5 principles on your COVID secure poster, is about consultation and sharing information. So don't try and do any of this on your own. Involve others, and that might be internally and externally. My experience thus far has been that the funders have been exceptionally supportive. So if you're concerned about doing something, then speak to a funder. They are all clearly trying to help at the moment. So make use of that if you can. Copy what others have done if it's appropriate, but don't blanket copy, because their circumstances, their building's definitely going to be a different shape to yours. Their staff team might be different. They might have different resources available to them. But if you've got good things that you can copy, then do copy them, because yeah, it's hard enough work doing all of this without starting from scratch on your own. Share what you're doing with others, ask around, and just include as many people as you reasonably can, I would say. And just bear in mind that people have different levels of worries, and some people are very, very anxious about returning to work or returning to services. Other people are desperate to get back in our buildings. Make sure that you plan for your own organisation and your own circumstances. Prioritise what your initial tasks need to be. I'm sure that, I know some of the people who are here at the presentation have done some amazing services in a different way because of COVID. And if that's working and you don't need to fling your doors open, then carry on doing that. You shouldn't feel pressure to go back to doing what you were doing on the 22nd of March. We can continue to do what's working. And think about, I suppose, short, medium and longer term. What can you leave for now? What can't wait? So for us as an organisation, one of the user groups that regularly attends our centre is adults with long-term and enduring mental health issues. And we really want to prioritise getting them back, because we know that this period has been particularly challenging for them. So that's one of the ones we've started to prioritise. I'm sure you'll all have your own examples and your own circumstances. In all circumstances, though, you need to start with the building. So if the building isn't yours, you need to speak to whoever it is responsible. So if you rent a room in a centre, then you need to speak to the centre managers, okay? And that will be really useful because you'll get their risk assessment and you can build your service risk assessments around that. But if you are responsible for the building, you will need to do a COVID-specific risk assessment for your building. You might also need to review your existing risk assessments, but you can see the key things that will need to go in your COVID risk assessment. All the things you would say around hand washing and people cleaning after themselves, the general cleaning regime. All the guidance says is that cleaning should be increased. So you will have to decide what increased means for you. You will definitely need social distancing measures, you'll definitely need signage. You may need to separate areas and you may need to create pathways in and out of your building. The guidance talks about increasing the number of entrances and exits if you can. Obviously, bear in mind your fire regulations within that too. Cleaning should include the disinfection of all areas that have been touched, again at reasonable intervals. You'll definitely need to include how you can dispose of refuse, and you might need to consider queue monitors. So, you know, like you have at the supermarket, somebody who lets you in and out. Hopefully, though, if you go into this slowly and steadily, you won't need a queue. You won't need a queue monitor. You won't need somebody to manage people coming in and out. You shouldn't be having those types of numbers at the moment. So after you've done your building risk assessment, you can then move on to your services. And we've talked about this a little bit already in terms of you don't need to automatically go back to what you were doing previously. So you can phase your services in. You might decide that some of them are just not on the list for reopening at the moment. For example, if you are working with old people who are all over the age of 70, or if you have a user group that have been shielding for the last 12 weeks, you may decide that they're just not on the list at the moment and there's other services that can be provided for them. The key government guidance of stay at home if you can, non-essential travel should be avoided, and groups of no more than 6 can gather at the moment, and 2 metre distance are still key messages, and all those key public health messages still stand. If it's working, then I would absolutely advise retain your online activities, but you might want to reopen some face-to-face. Just think about what's best and make sure it's in your risk assessment and make sure it's written down. And if it's not written down, then it isn't in a risk assessment. This is the Health and Safety Executive Risk Assessment template. So I've completed this in a really shorthand way. So your risk assessment will definitely be more detailed than this when you do it. You can use this template, or there's other ones that are available that we can have a look at afterwards. But they follow a similar pattern. So you have to say what you're assessing, who has carried out the risk assessment. You won't use the phrase competent person, you'll put the name of the competent person in your risk assessment. You'll say when you're going to review it and the date it was carried out. You will assess what the risk is, what you've currently got in place to control the risk, what else you can do, who's going to do it by when, and then you will mark off when that's been done. A risk assessment is a live document. So it should be reviewed frequently, and particularly with all the guidance changing, I think, you know, I'd be looking to review your risk assessments every week if you're opening. It's also advised that risk assessments for COVID are shared, obviously with your staff team or your workers. You would do that anyway, but with your wider building users. So if you do decide to open, your risk assessment should be available to your building users. And I think one of the things that we find the most useful in terms of doing a risk assessment is actually to walk through what you're doing. So, you know, somebody to arrive at the building as a service user would, and then you can kind of make a note of every risk and every potential risk while that person does their journey, as they would normally do. Moving on to my next slide. Oh, there we go. You will want to do risk assessments for each of your services. So this is an example risk assessment for some youth provision, and it's been written with the current guidance, which is of course that we can only work with groups of 5 or less, and actually it's got to still be outdoors as it currently stands. You can use the same format for every kind of scenario. This is an example for one-to-one. Let's see if we can go back to that. One-to-one adult services, so maybe for advice and guidance services, and how that could work. Okay. The main points from your risk assessments are that they've got to be live, so you've got to review them regularly. They've got to be completed by a competent person. Again, it's one of those vague descriptions that health and safety executive don't actually explain, but you know, somebody who has some understanding of what they are doing, and that, you know, has read the guidance and has got some awareness. They've got to be consulted upon and widely communicated, and in this case that means to communicate with your service users as well, and they must always be written down. And your key messages around hygiene and social distancing have got to be in those risk assessments. This is my mantra for risk assessing in the current situation. You may want to adopt my mantra or your own, but I think the guidance, if you choose to interpret it as such, can be quite permissive. So the guidance that came out yesterday allows a multi-use community building to have 30 people in a group. So if you take that as a single line within the guidance, that means that we could open, in our case, we could open our community hall and we could bring 30 people together to access a service. Okay, but just because we can do that doesn't mean to say we should. We need to be really careful about measuring that space and making sure that our maximum numbers can maintain that 2-meter distance. We also need to make sure that they can get in and out safely, and there's not going to be pinch points in the corridors, that our toilets have got the capacity to manage those types of numbers, etc., etc., etc. So just because you can do something doesn't mean to say you should. Okay, I'm just going to flick back. This is just revisiting the key links around this at the moment, and obviously these are all in the slides you're going to get. So that's the main bit. So I'm just going to whiz through the FAQs that we'd identified before today. So the common question that we're asked a lot is what PPE do we need? So PPE is the last line of defence. In the hierarchy of risk assessment, it should be the last thing you rely on. You should remove the risk or remove the person from the risk before you start to consider PPE, if you possibly can. Do your own risk assessment, but in most situations you should only need PPE for essential cleaning or if a COVID case is notified to you. We've also been asked the question a lot, will our insurance still be valid? What I would say is, if you're not sure, check with your own insurers. But if you are doing what you usually do and you've done a COVID secure risk assessment, then yes, your insurance will cover you. If you're planning anything new, then you definitely need to consult with your insurers. One that we're hearing a lot is that we don't actually want to open yet, but we're under pressure from service users. I've certainly experienced that. I got 10 phone calls one day last week to say, when can we come back? You definitely don't have to open from the 4th of July. Make your plan to suit you, your staff, your volunteers, I would say, and go slowly. You know, just because you can doesn't mean to say you should. Be as ready and as confident as possible before you do consider opening. As I said before, most funders are really supportive, and speak to your funders and get advice before you fling your doors open, so to speak. What do we do if someone gets ill with COVID symptoms on the premises is another question. Again, this should be in your risk assessment, but you should have a room and, if possible, a separate toilet where a COVID case could be isolated. So if somebody attends and becomes ill during one of your services, they should be able to be seated somewhere safe until they can go home. And then once they've left, you have to implement your planned cleaning regime for those circumstances. Again, what if a client tests positive for COVID after visiting your service? Again, this should be in your risk assessment. You should be recording everyone's contact details to track and trace. But if you've implemented effective COVID secure principles, then you should be okay. If you noticed another client sit with that person for more than 15 minutes and after advice they've not moved away, they would need to be contacted through the track and trace system. So that again needs to be in your risk assessment. Lots of questions we've had previously about toilets. Can we open toilets? Yes, you're encouraged to open toilets because toilets is where your hand washing facilities are. So yes, your toilet should be open. Again, need to be risk assessed, cleaned regularly, all those types of things. Somebody suggested that you need a queue for toilets, you know, for like a toilet monitor, somebody handing out toilet roll or something like that as people are going in. I would say try not to be in the position where that could be a problem. Limit your numbers until you can manage them effectively to avoid having toilet monitors. You might want to think about restricting numbers or helpers or having pre-registration for your services, just to avoid queues. Another question was, can we be sued if someone contracts COVID at our premises? I'm not aware of any precedent for this yet. I don't think that's happened. Obviously, the potential is yes, but you can mitigate against that by having your COVID secure arrangements, making sure you've got your signage and your active daily management in place. People have also asked about signs. Again, your signage should be made clear in your risk assessments what you need, and make sure your signage is appropriate to your users, whether that's using pictures, simple diagrams, community language posters. And lots of those are available on gov.uk or the Keep Safe website that I mentioned earlier. A couple more questions to go. One is, can people share equipment? The simple answer is no, but the perhaps more complicated answer would be avoid this wherever possible. Things like staff signing in with their own pens and a member of staff signing in visitors rather than people sharing a pen. Cleaning your telephones, your computers, play equipment if you're working with children. Hand washing and equipment cleaning will be part of your risk assessment. If possible, try and have individual equipment. We've planned play schemes this summer where we will give the children their own bag of toys, their own bag of arts and crafts materials, so they don't have to share with anybody else. And the big question now is, how many staff and visitors can we allow on site? So you'll need to calculate this as part of your risk assessment. The guidance that came out yesterday, the guidance for safe use of multipurpose community facilities, does mention the number 30. It says that 30 is kind of the limit, but it does say if you've got sufficient space, you can have more than 30. But it also says that gatherings of more than 30 people are not lawful. So it's not entirely clear. I think you need to look at your space. I think you need to measure it. I think you need to be really, really clear. I don't think there are many centres that I'm aware of that could comfortably fit 30 people with a 2-metre gap between them in their spaces. If you're the exception to that, and you can demonstrate that with a clear plan and it's in your risk assessment, then it is allowed. But wherever possible, err on the side of caution, I would say. If your space measures to fit 36 with a 2-metre distance, then you might initially want to limit it to 24 or to 18, to half your initial number, and just manage that slowly, test it out. And also consider shift working for your workforce, consider splitting your service users into groups or doing shorter sessions. So if you normally do a 2-hour session with 20 people, maybe do two 1-hour sessions with a cleaning break in between for 10 people. So managing your numbers in that way. Right, that's me whiz through, and I'm sure I've gone massively over time, but I'll unshare my screen now.
That's great. Thank you very much, Claire. Hopefully that's given everybody a bit of a start in terms of how you would start to approach that risk assessment in your own organisations. So obviously we've run through some pre-prepared questions there, but I know there have been some on the chat. So Millie, have we got a couple that we can put to Claire now, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Claire. That was really interesting and really informative. It was just a few questions in relation to the number of people. So there's the guidance around there being 30 people. Is there anything around limits to the number of different households that might cover?
Yes, there is. It's basically the same rules as it is in life, as in it's the same guidance that affects us all on a day-to-day basis. So the guidance talks about no more than 2 households socially interacting within the space. Now, I'm assuming, because it isn't clear, that social interaction means going closer than 2 meters together, because you can actually have more than 2 households in the same space as long as they are socially distanced. You can have up to 6 people meeting outdoors. Does that make sense?
Great, thank you. And then a couple of questions, a few questions actually, obviously around risk assessment. So earlier on, there was a question about seeking some advice about consulting with staff whilst they're on furlough. So you mentioned, when you were mentioning around, consulting involving people in risk assessments and how that works. Yeah,
I think initially the guidance was that workers on furlough shouldn't really be contacted. They shouldn't be kind of bothered by work because they are laid off for that period. It is reasonable to contact your staff to maintain contact with them during the period of furlough, and I would regard a consultation and sharing of information around health and safety to be a pretty vital communication whilst people are off. Clearly they're on furlough and they have the choice not to respond, but I would definitely share the information with them. Yeah. We've only done a couple of kind of staff Zooms whilst the workforce have been furloughed, and obviously people have the choice whether to come to those or not. But each month with our pay slips, we send out an update about what we're planning. So that the plan that I showed you earlier with all the arrows and the emoticons, we sent that out to everybody so people can see what we're planning to do in that format as well.
Great, thanks, Claire. There's another question. If there are other groups using your building, should they provide you with their risk assessments?
Absolutely, yes. Sorry, should have said that, shouldn't I? That's at the top of our building risk assessment. Yeah, definitely. So anybody who wants to come back as a hirer, which is how we would treat them, so any room hirer should be provided with a copy of your COVID secure risk assessment, and you should take a copy of their risk assessment about what they're planning to do. We are currently saying we are open to room hire from next Monday, and we are currently saying that the hirer's risk assessment has to be in with us at least 3 working days before the hire, and it has to be signed off by either me or our centre manager before they're allowed to confirm the booking effectively.
Great, thank you. And another kind of query around whether or not individual risk assessments for each service user might be required.
Yeah, usual practice applies, to be honest. If you would need let's think of an example for us. We work with children and young people with special education support needs, and we have an individual risk assessment for those young people. So we would continue to do an individual risk assessment for them and consider COVID within that risk assessment.
Great, thank you.
Sorry, you'll also, on your risk assessments, you will need to consider higher risk groups. So you might not know, for example, that a service user has a pre-existing condition which might make them more susceptible to COVID. You might not know that somebody's over the age of 70 or that they're pregnant or any other of those features. So you have to take that into consideration in your risk assessment.
Thank you. Just a couple here now around on the topic, kind of on the FAQ of being sued. With regards to being sued, there's more of a comment about not being sure about what evidence there would be to say that they contracted COVID at your workspace, and then another kind of question from someone else arising from that, whether or not they should be keeping a register of service users or people accessing the building for contact tracing.
Yeah, sorry, I did mention that during the presentation. I probably went through it a little bit quickly. But yes, you absolutely must keep a record of your service users. My understanding, it would be name, address, and contact telephone number. The guidance has said that they are going to give further information about that and maintaining GDPR around keeping that records, but that hasn't come out yet. But yeah, you will absolutely need the individual contact details. And I saw the comment come up on chat, and I totally agree. I don't know how anybody could possibly say that they contracted COVID within your premises or on the bus on the way there or anything else. But that doesn't mean to say that people might not try at some point in the future. So, and it's a question that was asked of us, so I've answered it the best I could.
There's a question also about facilities more generally, whether or not you need access to hot water in order to open safely. I guess that's about the kind of cleaning and sanitation.
If it's a building, then I would say in general, irrespective of COVID, that hot water would be a sanitary requirement of any building. I am aware of buildings such as huts in parks and things where they might just have cold running water rather than hot running water. In those circumstances, because hot running water is not a feature of those buildings, then you could include in your risk assessment that there's never been hot running water at those premises, and therefore hand sanitizer is being supplied instead. But I think my personal view is that it would be reasonable to assume that a building would have hot and cold running water and therefore would have hand washing facilities.
Thank you. A question about PPE here. So if 2 volunteers need to work together in a smallish space, should they be using face coverings?
I think obviously try and avoid anybody needing to work within 2 meters in a space. In terms of social distancing, if they can manage 1 metre plus, so if they can stay more than a metre away, then face coverings might help in terms of reducing risk, and that could be part of the risk assessment. But as I said, in terms of risk management hierarchy, PPE should be the last thing that you rely on. So you do everything else first before you rely on PPE. And if they have to work together, if there's no other way around it, and they do face covering, the other things to consider is the length of time that they work together should be kept to as short as possible, and under 15 minutes is what the guidance says.
Great, thank you. There's another question coming along from, in terms of the contact tracing and the data needing to be kept. How does that work in relation to GDPR?
Yeah, that's the bit they've not released yet. They've not said yet about GDPR on that, but they have said that information needs to be held for 21 days. So
right.
I would say that you perhaps need to look at your general GDPR policy and see if the retention of that information for 21 days fits within your current GDPR policy and could be considered reasonable. The information is not sensitive, but it's personal because it's names, addresses and contact numbers. So make sure it fits within your current GDPR policy up until such time that further guidance is issued around that. I'm going to guess that they will say that GDPR doesn't apply to this data in these emergency circumstances. I think that's what the guidance will probably end up saying. But for now, cover yourselves, check your own GDPR policy, and only keep what you need to for the absolute minimum amount of time, which is standard GDPR process.
Thanks, Claire. Your knowledge is very impressive here. You're covering a lot.
I'm feeling like I'm on a quiz now.
It's brilliant. I've just got the one more for you now because I'm conscious of time. This is more kind of getting into specific activities that are being delivered, but we've got one that's come up around a group that does music and theatre, and whether participants could be singing and speaking loudly in a room together, even given the 2 metre social distancing.
I think that's one of the challenges of 2 metre distancing. Actually, if you've got quite a few people in a room and they're 2 metres apart, I think there's naturally going to be raised volume, isn't there, because of bridging that distance. But the simple answer is no. There is definitely no singing allowed, and the raising of voices should not be permitted either. So yeah, it's one of the things that's come up in the church guidance or in the places of worship guidance, right, because they're allowed to have a congregation of up to 30 with social distancing, but singing is absolutely banned. There's no live music, no events are not allowed, I suppose is the simplest way of saying that.
Okay, brilliant. Just to reiterate what Cheryl's just popped in the chat here then. So if anyone does have any more questions for Claire, please feel free to add them in the chat box still now, and we can follow up with Claire after the session and get those sent out to you. Thanks, Claire. That's it from me for now.
Yeah, thanks very much, Claire. That's absolutely brilliant. I think definitely the questions at the end there as well, really helpful for groups to be able to ask those and get that specific answer back. And definitely, as Millie says, if groups want to keep asking them for the next couple of minutes, we will save the chat and we will get back to you in terms of a resource with all of those in. So just in terms of wrapping up, yeah, just to reiterate, huge thanks to everybody for turning up. I hope you've got something useful from today. I hope the resources and the slides that follow will be useful for you as well. We will send them out to you. We will also put them on the website under the coronavirus microsite bit and the support for groups. There's a whole section on planning and adapting and planning to reopen, and the Cranfield Trust resources are already there as well, which is another very detailed list of things to consider. Huge thanks to Claire for putting all the effort into preparing the resources and the presentation. I think it's been really, really useful, and yeah, just a clear way for groups to kind of get a handle on some of this and maybe feel a little bit less anxious and a little bit less lost as to where to make a start. We will keep the conversation going. Do get in touch with us if you need support. We will, when we send the slides out, we'll send out contact details for all the CVSs. So if you're not from Manchester, City of Manchester, you will get the contact details for your local CVS as well. And just to say thanks to our 10GM colleagues as well for all their support in the chat function and the note taking, etc. It's really nice to work with you on this. Just anything else any other staff want to say?
I just picked up a couple of things on the chat. Somebody, I'm sorry, it's gone off now, but somebody said apparently the church guidance does allow live music as long as it's not kind of woodwind or kind of brass blowy type instruments.
Drums will be all right then.
So I guess guitar playing's all right as long as you're not singing along. It's the singing along part which would be not allowed. And somebody's asked about Zumba. And just to say that no indoor sport or physical activity is permitted in multi-use community spaces. I don't think we said that as we were going along. So you can, if you've got grass outside and you can manage 2 metre spacing, then you can do Zumba outside with your social distancing, but you definitely can't do it inside. So yeah, I just spotted that as it was going through.
Thanks, Claire. Thank you everybody for coming. Hope you found it useful. If it has been useful, maybe give it a mention on Twitter or social media, or drop us a line to let us know, or if there's other things we can cover, let us know. And yeah, take care, stay safe, and best wishes with all your planning for reopening.
Yeah, thank you, very good.
Thanks
Bye.
so much, that was absolutely brilliant.
Thank you, really good.
Thanks.
Thank you.
There's lots of people I recognised.
Yeah.
Not that you can see them all on one screen at one time, but I'm still trying to read through some of the questions.